Hey everybody, Vincent with Barco, here to talk to you about EventMaster Toolset. I'm joined in the studio by Michael Jones of Livebox Digital. Michael's going to help us break down how several different Encore3 features, when used together, dramatically speed up programming and make shows more comprehensive and more flexible. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks for inviting me, Vincent. I'm happy to be here, and I love using EventMaster products. It's a privilege to be part of this demonstration.
We've talked about individual features in other videos, output layers, presets, user keys, ultra-wide inputs, and so on. But this session is about how they work together as a system, and Michael has real-world insight into how combining these components results in a better, faster, stronger programming workflow. Michael, will you talk with me about a few features that help improve your workflow?
Let's do it.
First, let's talk about why these features are important in live events, especially fast-paced and complex ones. High-speed and highly capable features aren't just a nice-to-have. They're essential. They save time, which saves money, and they allow operators to quickly satisfy clients' requests.
We've all been there. The client needs more layers on screen. Maybe a logo's added. Maybe the entire screen look is changed. Things happen, but when they do, sometimes it has to happen immediately. That's what we specialize in, and I'd like to show you how I like to handle it.
I love it. So the question becomes, what tools make that possible? And more importantly, how do these tools combine into a workflow that can handle sudden, high-pressure changes? So today, Michael and I are going to talk through the big picture. Things like, why are user keys important? Why are source files important? Why are output layers important? What is layer identification and why is it important? Why are presets important, especially relative ones, right? And how all these elements complement each other to create a stable, flexible programming pipeline. They're separate tools, but combined, they enable a workflow where dynamic changes are not only possible, but easy. And that's the key, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Michael, let's kick things off. In your experience, what are some of the fundamental elements that help make your programming faster?
Well, for me, Vincent, relative presets are a must. I use them on pretty much every show that I do these days, and they help keep your presets to a minimum. It stops them growing exponentially, which is a good thing. Outside of that, I would say based on the complexity of the setup, user keys and source binding are very powerful elements. They put fine control over your programming and allow you to make pretty broad changes with a very simple change to one element. After all, without user keys, source file management, and bindings, everything that you do can become very difficult downstream. Once you understand these workflow elements, programming is under your control.
Spot on. And the interesting part of this is that each of these features support each other. For example, once you bind user keys to source files, you suddenly gain incredible speed and flexibility for your programming. And when you add relative presets, your ability to modify a show on the fly skyrockets.
I have to agree.
And that is why the Encore3 is a very versatile platform. None of these features live in isolation. Each one makes the other stronger. All right, let's get into a live workflow and see how all of these elements work together. You'll walk us through your process, and I'll pause, ask questions, and explain stuff to the audience.
Sounds good. I've put together a demonstration here in the studio. Let's take a look at it.
So here we are using EventMaster version 10.1 as it has recently launched. First, we want to start with kind of showing the configuration, right?
Yeah, that's a good place to start.
All right, so I see you have destinations already built, like the widescreen, the DSMA, DSMB. Can you just talk us through those?
Yeah, sure. I've kept it simple for the purposes of this demonstration. I've decided to create a large widescreen LED wall. It's using 4 outputs. The sum of the LED wall, the native res, is 13,824 by 1920 at 5994, which is the system rate. It's 4 outputs, and each output is a custom format.
Since you used custom format, I'm just going to call out that to do that, you would do a custom format in the Files tab, create your custom format, then apply 4 times what your custom format was. So that's awesome. If you wouldn't mind, let's click on that Files tab just to take a quick look at it.
Yes. So here in the Files tab under the Custom Format dropdown, you'll see that I've created a format of 3456 by 1920 at 5994.
Right, and that's a integer of some common tile sizes, right? Like 192 by 192 times 10 vertical. That's going to give you 1920 vertical, right?
Exactly.
So those are, pretty common depending on how many tiles you would use horizontally or vertically.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool, cool. All right, so we've created the custom format, applied it to the widescreen, made four outputs ganged together to create an overall resolution of, again, 13,824 by 1920 vertical.
Yes.
Awesome. Love that.
And in reality, I would run this at 10-bit.
Okay.
So I'll apply that. Just
going for high
something
quality.
I missed earlier.
Yeah, love that. Love that. Okay. Now I see that for your DSMs, you're using screen outputs. Speaking of outputs and screen resources available, I see you have an output called scans. What is that? What is scans?
It's a legacy term to describe a signal that's been processed and then passed on or changed to some degree. This destination is a UHD screen output. I'm using 4 layers within it to pass on 4 HD elements to our camera fly pack and records. So even though they're not really changed per se, they're still being processed, so it's a legacy term.
If I understand that correctly, I mean, you said there was one output that could be dissected down into 4 outputs. So because we're using UHD, that breaks down to like a 2x2 1080p, right?
Exactly.
So if I were to put 2 and 2 together here, you would take like a converter, like an EX, and put that downstream of the Encore3, send one UHD to it and break it out into 2x2 HD to send to your fly pack or sat truck or maybe backstage feeds or DSMs or somewhere. Effectively, what I perceive this as is you kind of squeezing some additional outputs. So instead of one output, you now have 4 HD outputs.
Exactly. And yes, as you mentioned, we use an EX for this, an Image Pro 4K. Aja makes some nice interfaces that will demux a signal to some degree, if you want to think of it that way. It's a good use of resources where applicable. If the camera system's running at 3G, 1920 1080p 5994,
right.
Then this is a valid work case. If the fly pack's running at UHD, then this wouldn't be a valid use case. So it's scenario dependent.
You said scenario dependent a few times. And we really try to show that with the Encore3 is how flexible it is and how powerful it is. Speaking of the power of the Encore3, now the new Encore3 has the multi-viewers built in. They're internally created sources.
Yes.
So we could use those on, say, scans, or as we see set up here, you have it hard patched to a direct output, right? We could use it in an aux, we could use it in a screen destination. And so I see you've chosen to do that here, which is fantastic. In fact, we'll show the multi-viewer on screen here as we prepare to launch into this demonstration. Speaking of the multi-viewer and launching into the demonstration, I don't think we need to really review the multi-viewer setup that much, as there's a video that's already been created for it. We're assuming that the user base already knows how to set up their super sweet multi-viewer. In fact, you've got a really nice Mona Lisa going there, and I love that. So let's just jump right into the programming and take a look, if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's do that.
Alrighty, so we're on the programming page, and what I'm going to ask Michael to do is let's go through the Sources tab first on the left, and let's take a look at your inputs and how you have created some sources behind those inputs. Because as we've seen in previous videos, inputs are not just an input, they're actually multiple source files referencing the base input. So let's go ahead and dive into that.
That's correct. And yes, I have created some additional source files for my inputs in this demonstration. So talking about inputs, I've chosen 2 graphics systems, which are dual output laptops. So we're taking the slide output and the presenter view output. That's Graphics 1 and Notes 1. Graphics 2 and Notes 2 is the backup to Graphics 1 or an additional graphics source. Then I have 2 playback inputs. I'm receiving camera program from the fly pack and also an aux from the fly pack to be used for camera ISOs, aka IMAG.
Very nice. So if we furl down graphics 1,
Yeah.
let's do that. We can see your sources.
Yes. So I was taught a long time ago that a nice workflow is to retain the original source file or the initial source file as the original unaltered version. So that's something that I like to adopt. I know that the first source file has no user keys applied to it, no source adjustments like colorimetry or anything like that, or aspect ratio adjustments to the source. I know this is pure and unaltered. While looking at graphics 1, I've made an additional 2 source files, and I have bound user keys to them. In this demonstration, or in this hypothetical show scenario, the producers have asked for 2 pips for 16:9 content. So I like to put my own sort of personal label on the end of the source file. This is just so that at a glance I know what I've kind of designated the use of this source for.
Yeah, very nice. That is the suggested workflow, and from Barco is to keep one undoctored and then create additional sources after that. And as we saw in the source video, you have 25 and 26, meaning those were created in that order, right? So we could see that number 14 was created along with the input itself, and then you came back and through your programming created them in order 25 and then 26.
Yeah.
And we'll see these source numbers pop up throughout the programming.
If I expand graphics 2, I'm fairly certain that they'll be 15, 27, and 28, because I probably, after making my screens and other things, made my inputs and then circled back and added the copies I knew I was going to need afterwards.
For sure, for sure. And that becomes fairly important at 16, 27, 28. You were pretty close there. And that becomes very relevant when you're using like the controller, the right-hand side of the controller, when you go to recall a source using syntax-based programming.
Yes.
So you could say source 16, enter, and it will drop source 16 in whatever layer you had selected.
Yeah.
Right? So pretty cool. I love the use of the sources. I love the use of your naming scheme. Now, I see that you're doing that for playback, right? 18,
Yeah.
29, 30, 19, 31, 32. Fantastic. I love to see the good, clean programming there. And again, want to drive this home for the users and the watchers at home is that you're creating building blocks. These are the fundamentals of the entire programming scheme, right?
Yes, exactly. To add on to that, the intended look for this show. So yeah, the foundational elements to construct that.
Yep, absolutely, right on. Yeah, in fact, speaking of those foundational elements, can we head over to the user key tab and take a look
Yeah.
at that? So here in the user key tab, I see that you've made a few user keys. Would you mind walking us through them real quick?
Totally. So the first 2 user keys are the keys for 16:9 content that are positioned on the stage right and stage left sides of the LED screen. The producers did choose that the pips land, obviously not to their knowledge, but the pips land across output scenes. So the boundaries of outputs that make up the LED wall.
Awesome, okay. And then you've got some stage right and stage left IMAGs.
Yeah, these are further outboard of the content pips and they have masking applied. So the position, size, and mask parameters are retained in those user keys.
If you were to click like the stage right pip, you could see in the user key box up there, it's just position and size, but if you do the stage right IMAG, you can see that the position, size, and mask are actually applied to those. So
Yeah.
we even give you visual indication of the parameters that are baked into those user keys, right?
It's very helpful.
Totally.
Yeah.
Thanks for pointing that out. And then if we take a look, if we scroll down, we've got scans, top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. Can you show us just an execution of one of those real quick?
Yeah, these aren't bound to anything. These are more kind of workflow user keys, so I can quickly align the layers to the relevant positions within this quad, UHD quad destination. For example, if I move layer 1B and then apply the top left user key to it, it just goes back to a known position of 00, 1920 by 1080.
For sure, pretty simple stuff. Now, one of the things that I think we want to point out during this is that if you create user keys for specific purposes, they may not be applicable for other screen destinations, right? Ideally, we would want to make user keys that are specific to the destinations, especially within size and positions.
Yes, I agree. And, you know, this example is fairly simple to all intents and purposes, but if I was dealing with multiple screens that all had their own looks, then I would start adding maybe S1 and S2 and S3 identifiers to my labeling scheme.
Yeah, you had mentioned it offline as we were talking through this setup. Maybe this isn't a great example for the use of the folders, right? I mean, you could have folders that are specifically for screen 1, screen 2, screen 3 on top of the labeling scheme that you had specified.
I haven't used any folders in this demonstration, but I would start using them when things get busy on a show.
If you wouldn't mind, now that we've taken a look at the sources and the user keys, can we push into presets and start seeing some cool stuff there?
Yeah, totally.
Here we are in presets. I'm just going to let you riff on this if you don't mind. Would you mind walking us through these?
Totally. So currently we're sat in a preset that consists of test patterns across the board. A test grid for the LED wall, some identifier slates for the DSMs, and some identifiers for the scan channels, scans A through D. I'll typically make a preset like this, and I'll put it somewhere further down the line numerically. In this scenario, I've chosen it to be preset 100. It's a complete preset, and preset 101 is the same look with the exception of the scans. In this preset, I send through content to the relevant channels that we've determined. So if I recall that, you'll see that in this setup, I only really have graphics and playback to send to the camera department. But I'll still keep the test cards live just so they have a signal rather than black.
For sure.
You know, I might decide to change that. Depends how I'm feeling sometimes.
Yeah, when you hit that door in the morning, you might feel spicy, you know? So we see that taken to program, that's great. Mm-hmm. Okay, can you scroll up and show us the first preset?
Yes. So in this hypothetical demonstration show scenario, I've chosen to have a blue and a green matte background. These are kind of pre-show presets which load the DSNs with the primary graphics set and also load the background onto the widescreen. They don't affect the scan's destination because I've already pushed the primary sources through to them. So this is just kind of a walk-in look.
Very nice. Yeah, go ahead and recall it. I want to show the audience something cool here. So we just came from a complete preset. That complete preset had every layer, every destination shown.
Yes.
Right, and not hidden from the relative preset records. So now you have click the blue background pre-show preset, which is a relative preset, and it has almost every layer hidden except for layer 1 in DSM-A, layer 1 in DSM-B, layer 1 in the widescreen, as well as the background for the widescreen. So you're effectively created a preset that just affects those layers inside of those destinations. And if the users at home are watching and they have questions on that relative preset thought process or how it's shown or hidden, I urge them to go and check out the presets video that we did that would show exactly why and how that works. But again, we've gone into a relative preset and it's recalled the shown or hidden state. All right, so if we go through to like a green background pre-show, like we wanted to change the background to green, we would hit recall current, and then we'll notice that basically the only thing that was affected by this preset recall was the background for the wide screen. So let's transition that to program. So now everything's live on program. We could see that in our multi-viewer here. It looks great. Now, what would happen if we wanted to perhaps throw graphics 1 on screen?
Oh, let's do that. So yes, preset 2 brings 2 pips on screen, which contain graphics 1, the SL and SR bindings respectively.
Yeah, can we zoom in on widescreen 1? Because I think there's something really cool to show the audience here as well. So if we take a look at widescreen 1, now this right here is to me, the money, right? This is one of the real powers of Event Master toolset version 10 and the power of Encore3, and that's output layers.
Yes.
So when you were recalling those complete presets and even the relative presets 1 and 1.01, those had screen layers. Every layer on it was a screen layer.
Yes.
But now that we've recalled preset number 2, which is graphic 1 pips, you have broken out those layers to be output layers.
Correct.
And then you have assigned them to their respective regions, right? Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, and exactly, that is entirely correct. In this preset, I have unmerged screen layer 1. So then I have a mix layer per output region, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4. Now I have remerged 1.1 and 1.2, and I've remerged 1.3 and 1.4 together.
As a region, as their own respective regions, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
I've locked them together so that I can freely position them on the seam of these outputs.
Nice.
Otherwise, if they were all just output layers bound to their respective regions, I'd have to do the maths for two sides, position them, etc., etc.
Right.
So yeah, I've remerged a set of output layers.
Very nice.
So that they can be used across this seam.
Now, for the users at home, this is a master use case of this, because what you've done is you've turned one layer, which is one point A and one point B as a screen layer, into 2 layers, right? So by regionalizing them, you have multiplied your layer count already, right? So we can start to see that regionalization and those layers start to exponentially increase as we go down through these presets. So it's going to be, hang on tight, it's going to be super cool. All right, so let's take that to program for me. And let's view all, great, love that. So we've got graphics 1 in the widescreen. It looks like we've got graphics 1 going to the DSM-A and graphics 1 going to scan A, as I believe is what we're calling that.
Yes.
Let's recall graphics 2 and see how that perpetuates itself throughout the
let's
system.
do that. So in preset 3 for graphics 2 pips, only layers 1.1 and 1.3, the merged pairs, are affected.
Right.
The background's hidden, the background doesn't change. The same here, everything except for layer 1 is hidden.
Perfect.
So layer 1 changes and everything else, whatever it was planned to do or is doing, isn't affected. The same for DSM-B. Only layer 1 is visible in the recording.
Perfect.
And in the scans destination, only layer 1 is visible. So whatever state these scan channels were in are unaffected.
Totally. But recalling that preset changed all of those different parameters.
Yes.
Because it's a relative preset, you didn't have to create a different preset for every iteration or combination that you could imagine.
Yes.
Right? This is where we start to see the reduction of presets by utilizing relative presets, right? Where we see the cascading and the intent behind the preset, as opposed to just making different versions of the preset to have all of the bases covered, right?
Yeah, so many variations.
Oh man,
the list.
Yeah, this would turn into 4 different 4x4x4 worth of presets just to change the amount of scan possibilities that you had. Not to mention, you would have to make a complete preset for every different iteration of potential outputs that you wanted. I mean, it would just go on.
How many combinations of numbers can you make out of 3 numbers or 4 numbers?
Right.
It's that sort of effect.
Yeah, it starts. They start to exponentially increase. But by, again, just to double down on this, by utilizing relative presets, you have reduced the amount of presets that you need to create and thus think about, right? And the less you need to think about your presets, the more you're able to focus on the show, the better a programmer you become, and you know this just as well as anybody, right?
And control just the elements that you need to control in that moment.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Okay, cool. Now, let's go ahead and take that to screen if you don't mind. Great, and then
let me recall preset 5. So we'll see the pips on the widescreen change, and DSM-A will change. B won't, because I like notes or prompters to stay where they're at when a video is rolling on screen.
For sure.
For the most part. We'll also see just this layer change to playback 2. Let's imagine playback 1 has crashed and it's offline. So for the video roll we're using playback 2. Only layer 2A is visible here. All of these are hidden, just to illustrate the point that you just made. And there it is. Let's transition it.
Very nice. Yeah, again, just reducing the overall amount of presets made makes the operator's life so much easier, right?
Yeah. And the show callers.
And the show callers, right. Now my lookbook isn't 15 pages, it's a combination. Your show caller could say, hey, just bring up graphics 1 and the pips.
Yeah.
Cool, I got that. That's no problem.
Yeah.
You don't have to look through and go, okay, bring up preset 14.3 and then go in and figure out where point 14.3 is and then bring that in. So just simplicity and style, right? Now, one of my favorite ones that we're gonna recall is the IMAG on and off, because I think this is where we're going to zoom in on the widescreen and let's show the sourcing and how the source bound with a user key presents itself.
Totally. I'll zoom in. I'll solo the widescreen and I'll recall preset 20, which brings our IMAG pips into play.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. So IMAG 33, if we were to take a look at the IMAG in the source list, throw that down, thank you. IMAG 33 is stage right. IMAG 34, which we see over here, is in stage left. And as we recall those presets, you're effectively recalling the source, which is recalling the user key that is bound to it, thus putting it into its respective location.
Yes.
And we were, to be fair, we were seeing that with playback 2, playback 1, graphics 2. They were populating in their location based upon the user key that was bound to them. So
yeah,
just another further example of how that could work. And if we take this to screen, we'll see how this affects the program. Additionally, we are using output layers, right? We're still using those output layers. Now, when we recalled graphics 1, there was only one output layer set created, right? Here we have the IMAG recall. And the cool thing about the IMAG recall, again, is that we're changing layer states from preset to preset.
Yes.
Right? And what's happening here is, upon the recall of IMAG on, it took layer 2 from a screen layer and then it distributed it out into an output layer. And it effectively distributed the layers into their respective regions. Now, for this preset, 2.1 is only going to output number 1, 2.4 is going to output number 4, and 2.2 and 2.3 are unused.
Yes, they're hidden and they're not part of the preset.
They're hidden, they're not part of the preset. We could potentially use those in the future if we wanted to. Okay, Michael, let's take that to program, right?
Okay.
All right, that looks great. You know, again, just to double down, reducing the amount of presets that we needed to create for this, utilizing relative presets, utilizing output layers, utilizing sources for every input, and binding user keys to those sources. So that's pretty sweet. But what happens if somebody comes up and says, hey, I want to add maybe a graphic to screen, like poll result that we have? What would you do in a scenario like that?
Like poll results that might be brought in at any random point during the program?
Yeah, sure.
Let's take a look. Let's go back to our configuration page. I do see a new source. It's this connector.
Yeah, like somebody patched that in.
Somebody just patched it in.
Okay, awesome.
And if I look in the input list, I'll see that the system will have auto-created an input upon detection of sync. So the first thing I'll do is take a look at it, look at some of the parameters. Okay. I'm going to rename it as survey.
And that's just to point out real quick for the users at home, this is that user-assisted workflow. As soon as it was patched in, we created an input config for you, and now you're able to just rename the input config and start using it, right?
Yeah. Okay, so we've got our source, our new input, I should say. We need to look at it. So let's introduce it to the multi-viewer. I'm going to put it next to these sources. So off the bat, let me just take a look at the size of these windows, 320 by 180. I'll apply that to one of the custom size values. Well, it already is. So let me bring the source in. Here it is. And I'll put it here. So looking at it in the multi-viewer, I can see that we probably don't want the white to be there. So let's get rid of the white.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're imagining that this element will randomly appear in the center of the screen at any given moment. It's a random thing for the audience. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to treat it very much like my iMag preset, where it's just one element on and off. For that, I'm going to hide layers 2.1 and 2.4. I'm going to make 2.2 and 2.3 visible. I'm going to show them, and I'm going to merge them together. That way, I only have to deal with one layer, and I can freely position it over the seam of these two outputs.
For sure. You regionalized outputs 2 and 3.
Yeah. So let's first of all, I want to make a source copy or an additional source for the survey, keeping the original as the unaltered version. Let's add a new source, and I'll give it my own identifier, pip center crop.
What you're going to do next is you're going to probably drag in source 23.
Yes.
Freeing it of its position.
Yes. Allowing it to be manipulated.
Yeah.
Okay, so the producers have told me they want it to be center at the same height as the other pips. So I'll use the relative top alignment tool here. And to center it perfectly on the screen, I'm going to select the layer, turn my AOI markers off, and use the absolute horizontal center tool. With the AOI markers off, the alignment tool will respect the entire canvas rather than the output region that the layer is hovering over.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There we go. We're centered. We're top aligned. I'll turn my markers back on.
Nice.
Yep. And now I think we need to do some masking. So I'll go into the Layer tab, and under the Sizing Parameters tab, I'll drop the mask menu down and apply some masking values. I'm going to go with a guess. I'm going to say it's 25 pixels on the left and right.
Okay. Not quite.
No, it's close though, maybe 26.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I'll call 26. Let's do that.
Yeah, I think that's good enough for the demonstration. You know, in reality, I would really scrutinize this. On the bottom, I think 12. Close, but no cigar. Maybe 13. Yeah, that looks good.
That looks great.
Yeah. Okay, so all of my layers are hidden except for 2.2/2.3, which is the intended layer set for this source.
Yep.
So let's make a user key now that we've given this source the treatment that it needs.
For sure.
To do that, I'll go to the user key tab. And for this user key, I want to record the position, the size, and the masking parameters.
Perfect.
With those selected, I will save the layer parameters to a new user key. And I'll call this the same thing as my label identifier that I chose, pip center crop. I'll leave it as user key 9 for now. And to bind this to the source, I'll select the source tab. This is where I can make source adjustments like colorimetry, aspect ratio, sizing, and bind into user keys.
Yeah, for sure.
So let me bind it to my newly created user key. I'll save the source now. And to highlight that, let's say I move it somewhere really strange, like over here. If I drag the source back into the layer, it'll move to its bound position.
Yeah, very nice.
And anytime this is introduced to the canvas, it'll respect the bound position as much as we saw with the iMag that had previously been in it.
To triple down on this, if you were to make an adjustment to the user key, every time you recalled a preset that recalled that source, or anytime you recalled that source period, it would apply that user key to it, right?
Yes.
So that's perfect. Okay, so now that we've created the position, we've masked it, we've created the user key, we have bound the user key to the source, we've built our building blocks, how would we write this into a preset in a normal show environment for somebody like yourself?
Yeah, at this stage, I would consider what else needs to receive this source. So typically, DSM-A is the audience-facing content, or the program DSM. It shows whatever the audience can see for the most part. So I would include the survey on DSM-A. This is intended to be a random on-off scenario. So to avoid exponential preset creation, instead of using layer 1 to show the survey, I'll cover layer 1 with layer 2.
Ooh, nice.
To show the presenter the survey, and then when it's removed from screen, layer 2 is removed and layer 1 is in the state that it was previously in.
Re-exposing layer 1, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, love that.
So to do that, I will hide layer 1, and I'll make layer 2 visible. I'll bring that onto preview. And for this purpose, I'll just use the original source. If they see the white, it's not the end of the world.
Right, for sure.
So let me just align that. I also want to send it to the camera department, so I'll arm my scans destination. I will hide layer 2. I think playback 2 might have been the last audience-facing content that we took to program.
For sure.
So let me hide that layer. And I'll use layer 3 scan C, or channel scan C for that. So let me show layer 3. And for the sake of time, I'll also send them the original source. In reality, I'd make a user key specific to this small quadrant area and give them the same treatment. But they can also do that in the Carbonite switcher or the Blackmagic switcher or whatever else they're using.
Yeah, for sure. Additionally, you could have made the mask and then filled it vertically or horizontally within that respective region. Yes. But for the sake of time, we don't really want to go through all that. We're just going to let the SAT truck figure it out from there.
Yeah, they might be doing their own pip composition.
Right.
They might want to scale it themselves. I'm giving them the raw source.
For sure, yeah. Exactly.
But yes, there are multiple options.
Right, right.
Yeah. With all that said and done, I would now create a relative preset that only affects these layers.
Yep, and that's to bring it on. Again, we're at the point of bringing it on. So the preset would be, what would we call this, like survey on or something like that?
Yeah, it's similar to the iMag on and off preset, where we bring it on, they talk about it, it goes away, and the show continues. And then it comes back at a random period.
Yeah, for sure. Perfect.
So in the preset tab with relative selected, I will save this from preview. I'll call it survey on. I'll also unlock it and renumber it. I want it further back down the list, so let's call it 6. And even though it's in preview, force of habit, I'm going to recall it, and now I'm going to transition it to program. There it is.
Great, love that. Now, what would happen if we wanted to take this off?
That's easy.
Okay.
Our layer states are in the correct place with regards to visibility or things that are hidden. So I would clear layer 2. I would clear layer 2.2.
It was 2.2.
3.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And then I would record a new preset called survey off. I'd probably make it 6.01.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Having said that, I am not going to include scans in this because they will be in the place that they were previously. And then if I go into graphics 1, for example, that will change that portion of the scan.
For sure.
So it's a way of, again, avoiding that exponential scenario.
Yeah, additionally, the C channel was kind of open anyway, so it's the survey being parked there the entire time is not the end of the world.
No,
right?
now C is for the survey.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay, great. All right. So at this point, it should just be saved from preview.
Exactly.
And then rename and renumber like you're going to do, which is awesome. And now if we were to, if you don't mind, just humor me, let's bring the survey off by transitioning to screen.
Yeah. Well, I'll put survey back into preview so we can see the full effect. So survey off now, if I recall it, you'll see these pips disappear whilst everything else stays in the same position.
That's right. Not only did it stay in the same position, but that relative preset also observed the deselection of the scan's destination too.
Yes.
So it adds it everywhere when it comes in, and then it removes it from everywhere and then deselects the scans to ignore it essentially from changing.
Yeah.
So again, the power of relative presets, reducing the amount of complexity, reducing the amount of presets that are complete presets that might potentially be created with all of these different iterations of pips. It's mind-boggling, right? And so truly, I'm very thankful that you were able to display some of your awesome knowledge and your use case, and I genuinely appreciate that. So let's go back to the studio and wrap this up. As you can see, Encore3's ability to tie these features together is exactly the kind of thing that operators need for modern live event production. Michael, thank you for joining us and sharing your expertise.
It was my pleasure, Vincent.
If you want to connect with Livebox Digital, you can reach them at liveboxdigital.com. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us at Encore3@barco.com. Thanks and take care.